the pilot project will generate approximately somewhere on the order of 700 jobs. And most of those, or almost all of those, will be local because they'll be associated with the construction. So working with the skilled tradespeople that we have now. But a big component of any build-out, and one of the first things any manufacturer or engineering construction firm is going to say is, okay, where are the people? And we've seen this in other parts of the country where companies have located in North Dakota or Iowa, and in the beginning it's great, but then after they ramp up, they run out of people. And so this is clearly part of one of the things we're looking at and in building out what our strategic plan is.
I'd just like to add that the study that was done a few months ago, released by Nortec, evaluating the economic potential for this offshore wind industry, Lori just mentioned the 600 or 700 jobs associated with the initial 20 megawatt project that we're aiming to be completed by the end of 2012. If you get that document, which is downloadable from the Nortec website, the appendices actually break out the different types of jobs and different trades and sectors of the economy, if you will, that will experience the job growth. And one thing that we really haven't talked much about in this forum so far, but I think needs to be emphasized right here, is that a lot of those jobs are going to be associated with the maritime industries. We're talking about shipbuilding, vessels, ports, docks, things of that nature. So it's not just the turbines and it's not just the foundations. There's a whole maritime aspect to this industry that will emerge as it grows.
Yes. When are you projecting construction to begin on the first phase? And what are the major issues concerning construction that you guys have yet to be resolved?
Lori, do you want to handle that?
Right now we're looking at second quarter of 2012 to begin the development of the foundation construction. Part of the difficulty at this point is that we don't have all of our geotech data, and until we gather that data, which should be by the end of the month, it's a little bit hard to put out a schedule when you don't know what kind of foundation you're going to use. So, but in answer to the question, we are looking at second quarter of 2012 as being the beginning of the construction phase. Although, if there's a way to start sooner, we certainly would go for that.
Going back to my previous comment about the maritime, one of the enabling factors for building even the first project will be the necessary construction and retrofitting of an appropriate vessel, as well as the ports and the docks. So some of that work probably will begin in 2011.
As I understood it earlier, there was some hope that we would develop a niche in the manufacturing of the parts that go into these wind turbines. When you speak about the size of the turbine and the fact that it cannot be moved easily, that sheds some question, or like put some questions on that. Can you discuss the plans for making this a resident technology that Cleveland can excel in over time?
Rich, I put you on the spot a little bit, but can you talk to that one?
Sure. I think the challenge in moving this large equipment is, general, but specifically on the road. Our turbine is of a size that it needs to be built in a port and shipped from a port to be transferred to a boat to be installed. The Great Lakes are connected, right, via boat access, and specifically Lake Erie has a lot of activity happening in offshore wind beyond just Ohio. You have Ontario, which has a policy in place to drive significant incentives to spur the offshore industry. The New York Power Authority issued an RFP for projects that could go into Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. So, I think the advantage would be first mover advantage, right? And a first mover advantage in a demo project isn't enough, because the factories that would need to be created are significant. So it would have to be first mover advantage in an industrial scale. And with that, I mean, these factories are significant that, you wouldn't want to have multiple serving the region, right? So I think it's about first mover advantage in industrial scale.
Thanks. You said that the state owns the title to the land under the water. Is it as simple as that? I mean, does the state own all the land up to the high water mark everywhere around the lake? Or are there private issues of land under the lake issues that you have to... For instance, is the dredging land that you have to deal with that's already in place? Dredging ownership land, do you see what I mean?
Mark Shanahan.
There's an incredibly complicated legal issue around where the high water mark is and whether that's the dividing line. And I don't even try to understand that, unfortunately don't have to. But if you get a little bit out into the lake, and I mean 20 feet out, 30 feet out, at that point, everything then that goes into the lake has to make use of a submerged land lease. So dredged land has to have land leased by the state for the area where dredged land will be moved and stored. So it does cover the entire lake to the Canadian border and to the other Pennsylvania and Michigan borders.
Other than new wind turbines, what changes or improvements are necessary to our energy infrastructure over the coming years?
Mark, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think the biggest change, the biggest challenge that we face, particularly as we see more and more deployment of both renewable energy and also different forms of conventional fuels, smaller, what they call distributed generation, is that our entire grid system is built to service centralized power producing plants. And we have to begin to rebuild that grid, which is already aged, and at its capacity in a lot of places, to bring in new types of energy and move that through the grid. Northern Ohio is lucky that right now it has a capacity in the grid to take that new energy in, but in a fairly short period of time that will begin to get constricted. Rebuilding the grid is an incredibly expensive proposition. I mean, we're literally talking about trillions of dollars nationally. But that is something we have to begin to do, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge. How do you make the power and then get it to the people who need it? Easiest example, and we're picking on the Dakotas here, best wind in the United States is in North Dakota. Nobody lives there. There is no one to use the electricity those wind turbines generate, and they don't have transmission lines to get it to population centers. So they can't develop wind power in North Dakota till somebody decides how they're going to build the transmission line and figures out who's going to pay for them.
If I could build on what Mark said, I think as renewable penetration increases in a specific area or nationally, it's important that the renewable generating assets act like traditional power generation facilities. For example, 20 years ago, a wind turbine was designed to protect itself from a disturbance on the grid. So when you had a disturbance, the wind turbine tripped offline, and it actually made the situation worse. So today, one of the things that we've introduced in our wind turbines is the capability to stay online and ride through those events, which helps you stabilize the grid in a particular area and allow you to achieve higher penetration of renewable energy.
What is the biggest impediment for you to get going on the initial project at this point? You kind of talked about it generally, but I wondered if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to having a financial package put together so that we have essentially a signed deal with all the parties involved. So it really comes down to the pro forma and having financial close. But so that's certainly one thing, excuse me, before we can get moving on construction.
Laura, you mentioned earlier in your comments about the regional nature of LEEDCO. Could you comment a little bit about what it means for a county to be part of LEEDCO?